All right, my English teacher friends. So I present in this writing workshop video a synthesis essay centering around the essential question, should school start later? So a participant in my national writing project, Teach It Right 5-week mastermind, dropped this seed, and I said, I'll just crank out a writing workshop for this. So it's a good question and a great way to introduce synthesis to my younger emerging students. So I'll stick to the status quo in this one, and I'll show you how to do some declarative and inverted theses, as well as tackle the body paragraph syllogistically. So brand new paper, same old templates, nothing changes. So here's the prompt, roughly, loosely worded. So existing research has weighed the pros and cons of pushing school start times back. Consider the following essential question. Should school start later? Read the following sources and accompanying material carefully. Draw from at least 3 of the sources as you develop the central argument that fully addresses your position with regards to the essential question. So there's one caveat that I should announce early up, just to give you a sense of how I run my writing workshops. So the sources I use, the students cannot use. Otherwise, when we model to this extent, when we Bob Ross our instruction to this extent, students tend to just sort of mimic and steal our thunder and not create a lot of original thought. So my sources are my sources. They cannot use them. And I was thinking for this project to actually have the students do a little bit of research and find the stuff, the sources that they need to help support, defend, qualify, challenge, refute their particular argument, their particular stance with regards to the essential question. So all of the examples that you're going to look at right now, I wrote. And that's what I mean by Bob Rossing your instruction. It's a really good idea when you run your writing workshops to write the essay a couple of times, provide plenty of exemplars and models so that your students know explicitly how to manipulate and pull the strings of the templates. It really demystifies the process for them. So I wrote 5 introductions and 2 syllogisms, and I'll walk you through it right now. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, how do I write the introductory paragraph? And since we are doing synthesis, we have the option of declaring or inverting. So as we know from our time together, for literary analysis, you want to invert. For rhetorical analysis, you want to declare. And then for argument, persuasion, synthesis, and research, it's a coin flip, 50-50, totally contingent upon where you want the thesis, first sentence or last sentence in the introductory paragraph. And I'll show you a mix of the two. Here's the thing, though. In my Bob Rossing, these exemplars and models, I found it easier to invert for some reason, but I know that some of my struggling and emerging students and your students as well find it easier to declare, so I tried my hand at both. So let's quickly unpack what I mean by these templates in terms of the declarative and the inverted. When you declare, you begin with the thesis. So we have our essential question, and what a student can do is just boom, right out of the gate, drop the answer to the thesis as succinctly, concisely as possible. That's what we mean by declare. From there, they're just going to flesh it out with some context and background. We've talked a lot about my Word Study Academy. My students can cop a pretty decent academic tone, so we want to have a nice teeter-totter balance of the colloquial, the academic, and the vernacular. So with a question of this nature, clearly we want our students to have a nice academic quality and presence, but they don't need to, totally geek out. They can be informal in some instances and incorporate some colloquial and vernacular diction, just to keep things fresh and spicy. So we've also talked about my Nuance Academy in terms of the sentence constructs. Just to rehash that, Strunk and White in their seminal text called Write It Right make the assertion that there's 12 different ways to construct a single sentence. So you'll see my students hopefully manipulate their syntax with the hopes of achieving voice rhythm and flow. And then all introductory paragraphs, regardless of the expository mode, regardless of the essay prompt, going to be 4 sentences long, no more, no less. That's kind of what the template suggests. We can flip that over on its head and call it the inverted thesis. In this case, you end with the thesis. So the 4th sentence is going to answer the essential question. So a student might begin with a hook, an analogy, context, background. You sprinkle in the tier 2, focus on those sentence constructs for voice, rhythm, and flow, and it's going to be exactly 4 sentences long. So let's take a look at a couple. And again, I wrote these, and I would just use them as models and exemplars for my students to kind of unpack things, especially do this early in the academic year when the templates are new and fresh for the students, and they're just kind of grappling with them and getting their head around their complexity. So let's see what I do here for this one. In order to actualize the full potential of every teenage scholar, the school day should absolutely begin at a later start time. So we can see here, this is what we would call declarative, because that answers the essential question right out of the gate. So that's a great example of a declarative thesis. So the remaining 3 sentences give the context and background to establish the line of reasoning. Research overwhelmingly supports the benefits while negating the small hurdles districts would need to clear to make such a shift possible. So we're just, laying the foundation for our line of reasoning. So it stands to reason that somewhere in the body paragraphs we would talk about that research and, make the assertion and then prove that, the obstacles are really small hurdles to overcome, no big deal. While there are a number of disadvantages to a later start time, these pale in comparison to the enormous benefits that will be reaped. So we can see that we're going to offer our concessions in one of the body paragraphs as well. Everything from academic performance to mental well-being, the total student body benefits from making these changes to the daily schedule. So again, exactly 4 sentences. There's no need to start summarizing any of the sources. We don't want to start quoting the sources. We don't want to retell the story of any of the sources, just a straight up nuts bolts thesis, right? 4 sentences. Note the sentence constructs, note the tier 2 level vocabulary. Nothing is over the top. I'm completely within my wheelhouse with some nice academic diction. I like reaped, for example, is nice. Negating, overwhelming. So again, don't overdo the diction, but keep it up there nonetheless. So let's take a look at another one done the exact same way. While the intent is good, pushing back start times would have dire consequences. So this is just taking a different angle, right? But it's going to be written the exact same way. Given that America already has an obesity problem, it does not make much sense to tamper with the availability of youth sports, something that will definitely be altered and impacted by pushed back start times. Second, with the cost of living becoming untenable for a lot of American families, reducing the amount of available work hours for teenagers does not make much sense. While placing the argument in a sensible and calculated fulcrum, later start times just does not seem to carry the benefits that a lot of pundits are purporting. So keep the vocab up, nice vocab like pundits, purports, fulcrum, right? So we have some nice vocab like that. But again, it's in the wheelhouse. We don't want to sound contrived. We don't want to sound pretentious. And good sentence flows. Like look at this sentence. Second, comma, with the cost of living becoming untenable for a lot of American families, comma, right? And you go. So parenthetical statements, some adjective clauses, some independent clauses, all the nice things that Strunk and White like to see in sentence fluency. And again, it does not matter. So thesis first or thesis last. So it's totally dependent upon where the student wants to place it. Here's another one. Philosophically and pedagogically, high school should be a microcosm of the real world. Okay, that does not answer the essential question, so let's assume that this is going to be inverted and that the essential question is going to be answered in the last sentence. And again, there's really no need to start with hooks and analogies. I often find those to be distracting and unnecessary. There's no need for poetry, no need to be cute in an academic paper like this. During these formative years, adults have a responsibility to prepare kids for what comes next in life. As such, everyone from parents to educators, governments to policymakers need to take off the protective kid gloves and give kids a taste of reality. The start of the school day should not be pushed back. Do you see how this answers the question? So start from the top again. The start of the school day should not be pushed back because this does not mirror what teens will encounter in the next phase of their lives. So that's done perfect. It's just a matter of placing the thesis last. Again, vocab, sentence constructs. In the Nuance Academy, students learn to master their grammar, their punctuation, their syntax. So in order to get that sophistication point, whether it be for they're writing for AP exams or just a gen ed class, there needs to be relative mastery of those mechanics. And Bob Ross never dumbed it down, so I don't either for my students. So show mastery, show the good stuff. Here's one more. Two frivolous factors dictate the outcome of this debate: athletics and the bottom dollar. So you can see here, it's kind of like poker where you're showing your cards, you're showing your poker face. This is going to set up the line of reasoning because now in the remaining body paragraphs, we must talk about athletics and the bottom dollar, the expenses of altering start times. So we have not answered the question, so it's going to come in the last sentence. This is going to be inverted again. Despite the fact that research overwhelmingly indicates the benefits of a later start time, as long as schools host athletic teams, classes will begin before the birds begin to sing their morning songs. So I'm just showing here you can do a little colloquial vernacular if you want for some pizzazz. Fiscally, this benefits districts as well. In spite of these variables, policymakers need to factor the greatest common good and start the school day at a time that benefits the majority of its learners. So it clearly answered the essential question in that last sentence. So this is how you do it. Tier 2, sentence constructs, thesis first or thesis last, exactly 4 sentences. And one last one. And again, I found it easier to invert, and this is one that starts with kind of that hook analogy idea. My generation does not need to be bubble wrapped any more than it already is. Between the helicopter parenting paradigm to the participation trophies, the adults in our lives are doing everything in their power to preclude us from being prepared to tackle the real world with any degree of success. Life is tough, but every measure seems to be taken to soften this reality during our upbringing. Clearly, we need to do what's best for kids and keep things as they are and not alter start times. So again, that answers the essential question, the very last sentence. So therefore, it's an inverted thesis. 4 sentences, vocab up, sentence constructs. So every single time a student writes argument, synthesis, persuasion, research, these templates of the declarative and the inverted thesis can be applied. So it's very easy, and it takes the guesswork out of the game as they proceed through the course and you Bob Ross your instruction. So the next question is this, because the intros are done. How do I write the body paragraphs? And my tacit response to that is, go syllogistically, proceed syllogistically every single time. So in my YouTube channel and in my NWP courses, I go over this thoroughly. So I'll just do a quick synopsis of this. If you want to do a deeper dive, get into my YouTube channel or take a look at my NWP work. So the syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, word wrangling, wordsmithing, and then the math and the sciences. And they would also often throw out these good, juicy, essential questions, and we see them at play in seminal texts like Plato's Republic, where the question is, what is justice? It's a very similar question in nature to what we're tussling with here in this synthesis paper. And Aristotle found that, students that were really cogent, that really walked a good, clear line of reasoning, argued syllogistically. And what he meant by that is that Students simply went from premise to conclusion. So here's an example. In premise 1, if I say arsenic is deadly, followed up by premise 2, my dog ate arsenic, and then I conclude my dog is going to die, we would all shake our heads and say, yeah, Christian, that makes perfect sense. That's cogent, right? That's bulletproof logic right there. Your poor dog. And that's the word that Aristotle used a lot, was cogency. I'll use it a lot in my writing workshop videos and in my teaching. Most teachers just call it clear line of reasoning. So let's talk about how this transfers over into the expository mode of writing synthesis. The first premise is going to be an argument containing a why reason. So in the introduction, we don't get into the whys, we just answer the question. So yes, no, or we qualify. So the first premise is going to be, why are we articulating our thesis in the manner in which we are articulating it? So this takes 3 sentences, and I'll model it for you in just a second. So the College Board on FRQ 1 for the laying exam always says your argument must be central. So in order to keep the centrality of the argument, I take 3 sentences in my template to make sure that the argument is crystal clear. Second premise is going to be textual support. We need a teeter-totter balance, the paraphrasing and the quoting. We know we need to draw from at least 3 sources. In the conclusion of the body paragraph, and I want to be clear about this, so the conclusion of the body paragraph, not the conclusion of the essay, contains the links and the echoes of the thesis. We go back to the prompt. Really make sure we're hammering the answer to the essential question. I often tell my students that the first premise is a promise. You got to go shake hands with that brother in the end. So really good students ask me good questions. They say, all right, if the introduction is 4 sentences long, no more, no less, you must have a magic number of sentences you're looking for in the body paragraphs, in the syllogistic body paragraphs. And I do. They should be 10 to 12 sentences, hard cap at 12, hovering around 10. In order to have a fully substantive argument, those 4 and 5 sentence little itty bitty tiny body paragraphs that students do just don't cut it. There's not enough there to fully get at an argument, to qualify it, to defend it, to spruce it up and fully demonstrate the thinking. So 10 sentences tends to be a good number. So I have 2 body paragraphs, and I'll walk you through both. So let's go back to what I was saying with regards to the first premise. Your argument must be central, and you need to state a why reason. So take 3 sentences to set this up. So in this exemplar here, listen to the why reason, right? Another thing that I do with my students is put your first premise in the language of a promise. What are you promising your reader? So let's see if we can do that with this. While the intentions of pushing start times back makes perfect theoretical sense, there are a number of potential obstacles that most theorists have not fully calculated or considered. First, in a COVID economy, most pundits have not factored into the equation the stark reality that many teens must work to help their families make ends meet. Second, given the increasing cost of obtaining a college education, there is a real need to start saving as much money as soon as possible to make attending schools a reality. So if we put this in the language of a promise, I'm expecting a couple of conversations here. So I want to hear talk about the economy and the fact that a lot of teenagers need to work to put food on the table for their families. Second, a lot of these teens have to work in order to start saving money to make the dream of obtaining a college education a reality. And that pushing start times back cuts into the economy of those variables. So since we mentioned the COVID economy and teens needing to work first, and then we talk about college second, it makes sense to follow the line of reasoning. Let's talk about the economy first and talk about education second. So always have a sequence, always have a chronology, always have a line of reasoning intact. So beginning as early as the fourth sentence, let's start quoting and paraphrasing. Since the lockdowns of mid-2020, the cost of living has gone up approximately 42% for the average American household. Everything from gas, food, medical expenses has skyrocketed, but people's pay does not reflect these changes. So that is a paraphrase from source B. It's aligned perfectly with the first, right? Where the second sentence of the first premise. First, in a COVID economy, most pundits have not factored. So it aligns with that. So our line of reasoning is intact. It's a germane paraphrase. Pam Shriver notes, as a result, that 38% of today's teens work approximately 25 to 30 hours a week to help their families pay for basic needs. All right, so we got a Pam Shriver quote in here. We quote, we got to analyze it. With this in mind, if the start of the school day is pushed back to the suggested time of 9 a.m., these families would miss out on potentially 7.5 hours of earned income on a weekly basis, and that comes from source D. So you can see here we're weaving the sources together. We got 3 in here already. But one of the nice things that we're seeing are the embedded quotes. There's an easy way to have that happen, and I call it the 5-word rule. If a student places a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote and keeps the quote small, it should sound conversational. So, all right, we quote, we paraphrase, we analyze, we keep the line of reasoning intact. Let's move on. As chart 2 indicates, even at the lowest minimum wage range rate, this amounts to a large annual loss that could potentially hurt a lot of American families. Also, given the fact that 82% of today's teens have their eyes set on attending college, these earnings are necessary in order to make these dreams possible, and that comes from source A. So do you see how that works? Let's go back for a second. So follow my arrow here. The first mention here is about, kids needing to help their families because of the economic situation wrought by COVID. And then the second thing we talk about is, saving money to make college a reality. So we have to go 1 and then 2. Talk about college. Talk about the economy first. Talk about college second. So let's keep going here. For those wishing to attend a 4-year college, their average out-of-pocket expenses is $10,373 annually, and that comes from source A. So you always got to include the source. Clearly, to absorb these expenses, teens need to start saving as early as possible. All right, so that's plenty of support and analysis. We're creeping upon 12 sentences. So let's conclude this. Let's bring it back to the prompt, bring it back to the thesis, shake hands with that first premise. The mere act of pushing start times back would have dire consequences for so many people. While schools start late, businesses do not extend their hours, thus cutting into the earning potential of students who desperately need these paychecks. As such, things should remain the same as they have existed for decades. And that's a full syllogism. It clearly sustains a line of reasoning. It's very syllogistic in nature, and everything is lockstep, sequential, mathematical, computative from start to finish. So students might ask, all right, I'm done with my first body paragraph. What do I do next? And the answer is simple. Bust out another syllogism. Just change the why reason, change your quotes, change your paraphrasing, 10 sentences to 12 sentences. So let me take it from another angle, right? So I'm going to have another argument that contains a why reason. That's going to be 3 sentences long. I'm going to teeter-totter balance my quoting and paraphrasing, and then the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph links and echoes like we just saw. So look at the first 3 sentences here. 2 driving factors have historically influenced the ultimate decision as to when school starts each day: athletics and bus driver availability. So clearly here, if we're going to have a line of reasoning, the first thing that should come up here is athletics, and then down in here we need to talk about bus driver availability if the line of reasoning is to stay intact. These roadblocks are frivolous in light of what we know with regards to the overall benefits of pushing start times back at least an hour. Not until districts reprioritize what is truly essential to each individual learning, nothing will change. All right, so we talked about athletics first. Fourth sentence, let's quote or paraphrase something about athletics. And then down below here, we got to get into bus drivers. Unfortunately, the fact that most schools are not equipped to host evening sporting events drives the decision-making behind start times. Jason Mitchell notes that the one surefire panacea to end this debate is that each school district be allotted the funds to purchase lights and the requisite fields for events to be played during the evening. And that comes from source B. We used our 5-word rule again. Short quote, perfect. And this quote is perfectly aligned with what we set up here in terms of athletics. Line of reasoning. So we quote, we got to analyze. While this expense would initially be quite large, the cost-benefit advantages would outweigh the expenditures. So note that we're doing the same thing here as in the introductions too. Focus on those sentence constructs, keep the vocab at an elevated academic level. Unfortunately, if we stick to the status quo, things such as depression, anxiety, obesity, the sheer fact that teens are walking zombies will continue to happen needlessly. Source A. So just cherry pick some quotes, throw them in there to support, defend your argument. Sadly, the fact that the sun goes down by 5 p.m. and that athletic games must be squeezed into those tight parameters is what principally determines the start of the school day. Another variable is bus driver availability. Do you see how this all aligns here? You said athletics first, bus drivers second. Athletics first, bus drivers second. So we go on to the next slide here. Let's see what happens. According to Victor Yeiser, the vast majority of bus drivers are retired and do not want to take on more than 3 hours a day. Source C. So again, this blend of quoting and paraphrasing. He notes that if the school day is pushed back to 9 a.m., these seniors would not be able to make medical appointments, VA visits, or participate in many senior activities offered in their community. But there's a way around this, as chart B indicates. There needs to be an incentive, so simply enticing potential bus drivers with an increase in salary and benefits would be just the thing that is needed to remedy the situation. So, this student happens to be me. I wrote this. You can see here the sources are in conversation with each other. There's a unity, right? So I use source B or chart B to basically say, hey, if we incentivize things for bus drivers, we can easily push the start time back a little bit to 9 a.m., which the science clearly indicates would be advantageous for our student learners. So the conclusion, let's wrap it up. Let's echo that thesis. Let's echo that prompt. Where there is a will, there is a way. Clearly, there's a way to work around these two issues that have historically precluded districts from starting each day a bit later. So again, all around 10 to 12 sentences. The conclusion need not go on and on. It typically just takes 2 sentences and wrap it up. Put a bow on the present. Put a bow on the thought. So that is how the templates are used in synthesis. And as I alluded to at the beginning of this writing workshop video, this is a staple of my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind, which is now being offered through the National Writing Project. And so starting in August of 2022, we started offering the Teach It Right 5-week mastermind through the National Writing Project. Good news, because it's cheaper than what I was offering it at. It's $350. It's a 5-week course. We will be meeting Sunday nights going forward from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the kicker is this. A lot of teachers need PD hours. You get 10 stamped branded hours from the National Writing Project for taking the course. The other thing going forward, now that school is about ready to begin for the 2022-2023 academic year, I will have a regular cadence going forward with Perfection Learning in terms of doing webinars on a monthly basis. And then I am going to be a lead presenter at the NCTE annual conference this fall in Anaheim, California, and I'll be working with my friends Tim Freitas and Brandon Abden. So if you want any information with regards to anything that I discussed here, and even if you want the slides, just email me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. You can get some more information about the National Writing Project and Perfection Learning at teachinghowtowrite.com. So www.teachinghowtowrite.com. And I should actually have a link up here for the National Writing Project. So they are www.nwp.org. So all my course information and course offerings are listed there, www.nwp.org. So hopefully you found this to be useful and can use it in your classroom. For now, be well, happy teaching, happy writing.